Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This afternoon I'm going to talk to you about 116th Infantry Brigade Royal Marines in Northwest Europe during 1945. Perhaps the first question to ask is, why was 116th Infantry Brigade formed? When formation was first proposed, the infantry manpower situation in the British Liberation Army was in crisis. There had been substantial infantry casualties in Normandy, followed by more during the Arnhem operation, and then significant casualties during the first Canadian Army operations to open the Scheldt estuary. In spite of their predicament, many Germans continued to fight with a grim determination. In order to make up for shortages of trained infantry replacements, divisions like the 59th Staffordshire had been broken up, regiments re-rolled, and officers from across the army combed out of arms and services to be retrained as infantrymen. The 21 Army Group was regrouping in preparation for crossing the Rhine and entering Germany. In parallel, planning and preparation was also underway for the occupation and disarmament of Germany, codename Operation Eclipse, for which the Navy already had a substantial commitment. Superimpose on this the planning for the Japanese War, and it's easy to see why the Royal Marine Office was less than enthusiastic when asked to provide 2 brigades of infantry for ground holding in Holland, when they should have been training for operations in the Far East. 116th Brigade became a reality on the 6th of January 1945 when a warning order was issued directing the concentration of 27 and 28 RM in Scotland and the formation of 30 RM at the RM Training Group Devon at Dulwich. Commander 116th Brigade was named as Brigadier C.F. Phillips. He was known as a disciplinarian and a decisive, formidable man with a powerful and dynamic personality. He had commanded 4-7 Commando throughout the Normandy campaign and the pursuit through France, as well as during the assault on Walcheren and the bitter fighting that followed. Now faced with training his brigade for operations in Holland, he was perhaps the ideal man for the challenges that lay ahead. The brigade headquarters formed at Chatham, with the brigade major named as Major McGill Crichton of the Camerons, and the DAA and QMG Major David Tweed, a Royal Marine, but both experienced officers. 27 and 28 RM were both originally formed as the nucleus of beach groups for service in the Far East, and they had to reorganise into Army Pattern Infantry battalions, which were much larger. An Army Infantry battalion in that period was close to 900 men strong, and both battalions needed reinforcements to bring them up to full complement. The men for these battalions came from across the Corps. Some were old hands who had seen service in the MMBDOs, landing craft squadrons, or Armoured Support Group. Some were straight from training at the Depot Lympstone. Either way, it was a considerable burden on the Corps, which was short of men, and they all required infantry training to varying degrees. Initial plans to concentrate in Scotland were changed, and the brigade concentrated in Yorkshire in the vicinity of Harrogate. Some of the camps were in poor condition. 27 RM's camp at Scriven, near Knaresborough, had been the home of Russian POWs, and required cleaning in the way only a Royal Marine knows how. Here in the cold winter, at the end of January 1945, the brigade mobilised, drawing their G1098 and vehicles, and trained for battle. The support companies, now equipped with carriers and 6-pounder anti-tank guns, all dispersed across the country for specialist training, not to be seen again before mid-April. While the brigade mobilised, Brigadier Phillips travelled back and forth to London and the continent to discuss the future role of the brigade and perhaps, as importantly, the progress of their training. Phillips was brutally honest about the preparedness of his units, recommending that they would not be ready before mid-April at the earliest. However, it was decided that the brigade would be called forward to the continent soon after the 15th of February 1945. The role of the brigade, it was agreed, was a holding role in the River Mars under 1st Canadian Army to stop enemy raiding parties crossing the river for information. It would relieve the Polish 3rd Infantry Brigade of the Polish 1st Armoured Division by the end of February, irrespective of its standard of training. Brigadier Phillips was told that the Commander-in-Chief appreciated the lack of training, but did not intend to use them for tasks for which they weren't fitted. 30 RM heard the news of their imminent departure to the continent after the whole battalion marched in full fighting order, led by the commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Walker, to Ampleforth College to watch the battalion rugby team play a scratch team comprising masters and scholars. Unfortunately, there is no record of the score. The Globe and Laurel correspondent of 30RM wrote that spirits ran high in the knowledge that we were bitten at the kill. This was possibly a view not wholly reflected across the brigade, where absence without leave was a prevalent offence, and 28RM had 19 cases in Yorkshire alone. On the 20th of February, the brigade moved from the UK via Ostend to Holland, where they concentrated in and around Bergen-op-Zoom. At the end of the month, orders were received for the relief in place of the Polish brigade, and brigade headquarters moved to Voet on the southern outskirts of Hertogenbosch to control the operation. At the operational level, as the brigade prepared to go into the field, 1st Canadian Army was engaged in a protracted battle in the Reichswald, clearing the Germans from between the rivers Maas and Rhine to provide a launching point for a future crossing of the Rhine, a battle that would continue through until the 10th of March. North Brabant, the province in which the brigade was to operate, was largely farmland close to the River Maas, sparsely populated, with small villages and farms. Most of the ground was below the level of the river, which was bounded by substantial dikes. Major road and rail lines of communication ran south to north through the main population centres like Hertogenbosch, but stopped at the River Maas, where all of the bridges had been demolished by the Germans. The river itself was about 120 yards wide and appeared slow, except in midstream. Although the civilian movement was prohibited close to the river, the locals continued to live in the hamlets and farms as they had always done. The Germans on the north side of the river, opposite 116th Brigade, were a mixed bag of different units. Facing the brigade were elements of the 17th Parachute Regiment of the 1st Parachute Army. Fortunately, most of their units had been redeployed to the Reichswald and only a few remained. They had been replaced by less well-equipped, lower-grade troops. In a number of cases, re-rolled German air and Kriegsmarine maintenance groups with little infantry training. The opinion of German parachutist prisoners taken in the Reichswald was that they were nothing much to write home about. Their method of operation was generally to close up to the river line by night, occupying fixed positions built into the dikes, which were wired in and protected by mines and machine guns on fixed lines. By day, they lived in the villages and farms in the hinterland, keeping the river under observation. The Poles joked that for the Germans, their main effort was either recce or surrender. Nevertheless, the German units changed on a regular basis, and identifying and dominating them was to become a continuous theme for the brigade. The 1st Brigade Operations Order was issued on the 27th of February. It directed that 27 and 28 RM should assume responsibility for the Heusden, Waalwijk sector and prevent any enemy landing on the south bank of the River Maas, and to stop any infiltration. With 30 RM still in training, the brigade was task organised with 4-1 Royal Marine Commando in the area of Krevike, 1st Polish Light Anti-Aircraft Regiment in the infantry role in the Lith-Marin sector with the 2nd Polish Armoured Regiment, and supported by the 90th Field Regiment Royal Artillery and a battery of 2nd Polish Field Regiment. The brigade plan was to establish a screen of observation posts well forward by day, with platoons at full strength, in depth, in prepared positions on infiltration routes, manned at night, and poor visibility. Troops were given permission to use local houses as accommodation. In 27 RM's area of operations, the commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Taylor, directed that while sleeping in houses was permissible, fighting positions were to be prepared in the dike or close to the accommodation. As the brigade shook itself out, Brigadier Phillips adjusted his initial plan and redeployed his armoured regiment from his own area, allocating a squadron to support each battalion while maintaining a reserve at the brigade HQ. The army was to be used proactively for counter-attack and for direct fire tasks against known enemy positions. As a rule, both sides operated at night and rested by day. The Germans routinely patrolled across the river with a mixture of recce and fighting patrols, as well as SS troops, specialists, passing through the 116 area looking to sabotage rail and road communications across 21 Army Group's line of communications. 27 RM was deployed with 2 companies forward, one in Heusden, each with outlying platoon posts, and 2 companies to the rear, either side of Elshout, where the battalion headquarters was situated. They introduced themselves to the Germans with Operation Blast on the 6th of March, which was an opportunity for the unit to use all its weapons, tanks and artillery, on known enemy positions on the north side of the river and to rough them up a bit. In 28 RM, only 3 of their companies were in the field, with the 4th training to the south in scrubs and woods close to the brigade rear boundary. 2 companies were forward on the river line and the 3rd in Walwijk. The pattern of life for the battalions rarely changed. The companies rotated through the forward positions and the days were punctuated with harassing artillery, mortar fire and small arms exchanges. As the units lived in the towns and villages, they were a target for harassing fire by the Germans. The 28 RM Marines used Walwijk for shore leave and was a regular target of the German artillery. This harassing fire was intermittent, but for the unwary of both sides, sniping was a constant threat. And in 28 RM's area, in spite of their own successes against German snipers, Lieutenant Parr of B Company was killed by a sniper on the 22nd of March. As the weather improved, so did the opportunities for patrolling. For 27 RM, it was Operations Toto 1 and 2 on the 19th and 21st of March, on which the battalion cut its teeth. The aim of these patrols was to capture a prisoner to identify who was opposite the battalion. The patrol commander was Captain Adrian Toes, DSC, who had won his DSC at the Battle of the River Plate, and whose nickname was Toto. After a successful recce patrol on the 19th, the resultant fighting patrol succeeded in wounding and capturing a POW, who it turned out was from Liga Horse Battalion 2, originally from an airfield in Amersfoort, re-rolled for a ground holding role. On the same night as Op Toto 2, 4 one-armed commando launched Operation Helen against an enemy position on the edge of Hedel, the aim of which was also to capture a prisoner and destroy enemy bunkers. Y Troop, commanded by Captain Adrian Lee of the Dorsets, crossed the river from Krevika and launched an assault at first light. There were no prisoners, but Y Troop suffered 2 killed, 2 missing and 4 wounded, although they claimed 12 enemy dead. Hedel was strongly held and artillery had to be used to enable Y Troop to break contact and extricate itself. But the traffic was not all one way. On the night of the 26th-27th of March, the Germans replied against 28 RM when a patrol crossed the river north of Doveren, infiltrated through the forward post and attacked Y Company. Y Company counterattacked with a small reserve led by the company commander Major Essex. Under fire from the north bank, they managed to kill 2 and capture another 2. The capture of these 2 men clarified the enemy picture north of the river. Both men were from Kampfgruppe Fuchs, Battalion 1409, with a strength of about 180 men. This area of 28 RM was unusually active, and a couple of days later the Germans crossed again and ambushed a contact patrol at Heesbeen, close to the Maasdijk, killing Marine Watley and wounding 2 others. Once again, Major Essex and his reserve pursued the enemy back to the river and caught them on the riverside before they could cross back to safety. For 30 RM in Bergen-op-Zoom, the focus was on training to a level where they could confidently go into the field. The brigade commander's priorities were that the battalion should master the basic tactics of infantry soldiering, including complete mastery of personnel and platoon weapons, fire discipline, and the duties of a sentry. He also stressed the need for physical and mental resilience to balance the inevitable strenuous and hard living. The officers and senior NCOs went to units in the line for battle experience. These visits were not without danger, as Sergeant Fuchs, the battalion sniper sergeant, found to his cost when on a raid with 48 RM Commando on Overflakke Island. He was one of the 8 casualties from mines during the raid. Nor was the rear area safe for the likes of the Reverend Brown, the 30 RM Padre, who was shot by a 28 RM sentry when he went to visit the unit. The culmination of 30 RM's training was a formal inspection of the battalion on 3rd of April by Brigadier Phillips, who was as exacting as ever and free with his opinion where his expectation was not matched by the unit. The battalion, however, was past fit for duty. As they departed, they were presented with a handcrafted unit flag from the nuns at the seminary, where the battalion headquarters was based. At the operational level, following the successful crossing of the Rhine, 21 Army Group went through a period of regrouping, which included the formation of HQ Netherlands District to replace 1 BR Corps. The role of HQ Netherlands District was twofold. Firstly, to continue to prevent the Germans crossing the river, and secondly, to prepare for the occupation and relief of the long-suffering Dutch population, codename Operation Placket. Brigade Operations Order 2, issued on the 29th of March, detailed the forthcoming change in command from 1BR Corps to HQ Netherlands District and the arrival of 30RM. On the 2nd of April, HQ Netherlands District assumed command and the brigade reorganised to accommodate 30RM. 4-8 Commando, who in the interval have replaced 4-1 Commando, returned to 4 Commander Brigade after a very short stay. 27RM therefore moved into Crevecoeur. 28RM shifted right to include Heusden, and 30RM moved into the Lith-Marin sector, formerly occupied by the Polish 1st Anti-Aircraft Regiment. On the 6th of April, the brigade frontage was extended west to include Gertrudenberg, and 116 Brigade became responsibility for a frontage of 45 kilometres. Patrolling continued throughout the period. 27RM put across patrols of varying success, and 28RM went on the offensive. On the night of the 5th-6th of April, a fighting patrol crossed the river with the objective of capturing a prisoner. On this occasion, things did not go to plan, and the patrol was caught crossing the river. Under fire, they lost control of their assault boat and were forced to abandon it and swim for the home bank. 1 man was killed. 5 were missing, of which 3 were never found. By incredible bad luck, they had bumped into the Germans trying to launch a similar raid, and had come off second best. 30RM came into the line overnight 7th-8th of April, taking over a very large area, a sweeping bend of the River Maas with a 20-kilometre front. Immediately after arriving and possibly taking advantage of a new unit in an unfamiliar AO, a German patrol penetrated as far as the reserve company before they were chased off. 30RM settled in with 2 companies forward and 1 in reserve, with counter-attack tasks in support of the forward companies. With the threat of marauding German patrols, ambushes were set on likely approaches, but it was hit and miss in such a large area. On the 11th of April, a sabotage patrol crossed through 30's area and attacked the Rossmal and Geffen Railway. That same night, A Company 28RM was attacked by a German patrol using Panzerfaust. They too were counterattacked, this time led by the Company Sergeant Major W2 Meakin, forcing it to withdraw, leaving 2 dead, with A Company losing 1 dead and 2 wounded. With the British and American forces now firmly established across the Rhine, preparations for entering the German ports and cities were being accelerated, and 116 Brigade was directed to nominate a battalion for duties in the Second Army to support the US element of Operation Eclipse. 27RM was nominated and the battalion departed on the 12th of April for Hengelo in Holland, where the US Task Force 126 was gathering preparation for entering Bremen. The unit taking over from 27RM was the Royal Netherlands Brigade, or Princess Irene Brigade as it was also known, which had been released from 4 Commander Brigade. The brigade actually was more akin to a battalion-sized battle group with its own light recce troop and field artillery. Their relief in place was conducted without interference from the Germans, and on the 13th of April they took over command of Lizard sector. On the 12th of April, 30RM's luck changed when they captured 3 men of Dutch SS patrol origin, but even after the battalion reorganised with their support company on the ground, the Germans persisted with crossing into 30RM's area, and despite the changes in defensive plans, on the 18th of April, a German patrol clashed with a 30RM post, and Marine Way was killed in the exchange. Whether it was the German patrol activity or a desire to push the Germans away from the lines of communication is not clear, but an operation was planned under the code name Op Mamba, which involved both 30RM and the Princess Iron Brigade crossing the river. Brigade mission was stated as 116 Infantry Brigade will cross the River Maas night 22-23 April and will establish limited bridgeheads on the north bank in the Bomber Ward. The concept of operations was that 2 battalions, Princess Iron Brigade left and 30RM right, would establish bridgeheads, exploit north, destroying the enemy as they met them. 30RM was to capture and hold Alum Island, hold Kirkdriel, and exploit to the River Waal. The Dutch were to capture and hold Hadel and link up with 30RM at Kirkdriel. The 30RM operation was codenamed Operation Deal, and the Princess Iron Brigade operation as Operation Orange. 30RM crossed the river at 0230 on the 23rd of April. The crossing was routine, with both ANX companies across without opposition. As anticipated, mines were a problem, as were booby traps. One was attached to a bell in one of the churches in Alham to catch the unwary, ringing the bell in celebration. As planned, 7th Platoon's May Company was detached to Kirkdriel, which provoked the beginning of a protracted battle in the village, which was held by the Germans in more strength than anticipated. They were reinforced by 9th Platoon in the afternoon, but both platoons were forced to withdraw later on, leaving 35 men unaccounted for. B Company crossed the river at 1400. Their objective was the fort on the Herewardon Isthmus by the River Wye. The company then dragged their assault boats into position under fire, paddling across a creek. The lead platoon then assaulted across a marked minefield, but was unable to secure the fort because before they could get to it, the Germans blew it up, still with their own men inside. The Dutch launched their assault at 0530 hours using LCA from 509 Assault Flotilla. Although the village appeared empty, the Germans responded immediately when they were alerted by a booby trap casualty, and the battle for the village began in earnest. The German response built in intensity and from many directions. Contact patrols sent to Kirkdriel to link up with 30 RM were beaten back by the Germans. The Germans then attacked and penetrated into the village, but were rejected by a counterattack at 1430, supported by mortars and artillery. The Dutch then reinforced throughout the day and consolidated their positions in the village. Overnight, the Germans continued to probe both units, but with little success. In Hadel, the Germans continued to try to infiltrate into the village, but artillery and mortars kept them at bay. The 24th of April was relatively quiet for both battalions, but on the 25th, the Germans launched a full-blooded assault at battalion level onto the PIB, which was preceded by artillery and mortar concentrations onto the village. The weight of the attack took the Germans into the village, and a fierce close-quarter battle developed. Artillery was central in defeating this assault, with the FOOs making very fine adjustments and bringing fire close into the battle group positions. Eventually, the enemy were forced out of the village and retired from the area under harassing fire. HQ Netherlands District now decided that Op Mamba should be curtailed and issued orders for a withdrawal to original positions on the south side of the river by first light on the 26th of April. Throughout the 25th, both units thinned out their forces as they stepped back over the river. 30 RM was clear of the north bank by 1845 hours on the 25th. The Princess Iron Brigade were clear of Hadel by midnight on the 25th. 30 RM lost 3 killed, 8 wounded and 21 missing, presumably dead or prisoners of war. The Dutch lost 12 men killed. The Germans had been given a bloody nose, and the operation possibly prompted their early withdrawal across the River Wye, but they had been sufficiently concerned by the threat of the operation in Hadel to march a battalion, the 195th Volksgrenadier Regiment from Tiel on the northern bank of the river, to Hadel to stop the Dutch from either holding or exploiting beyond the village. But what of 28 RM? During the battle, they had not been idle and had patrolled aggressively across the river to fix the Germans around Amassuyen, so that they were unable to interfere in the Hadel battle. However, on the 24th of April, they were warned that they were to be relieved by the 30th Battalion Royal Berkshire Regiment. They were to be assault troops for the seizure of Lubeck. On the 28th, the battalion left North Brabant on the long journey into Germany. In the last days of April and the early days of May, there were yet more changes in command relationships as newly formed formations came into the field to replace HQ Netherlands District south of the Maas, and HQ 116 adapted to command of a brigade with only one Royal Marine Battalion. However, on the 3rd of May, the headquarters and 30 RM were warned off for a move into Germany, coming under command of Flag Officer in Charge Kiel for military duties in the North German ports. Stepping back 12 days, you'll recall that 27 RM had left the Maas for the Oberklipps concentration area at Hengelo, where they were to join the US Navy Task Force 126 for the occupation of Bremen. They were not there long, as Lieutenant Colonel Taylor was given permission to seek more gainful employment with 2nd Canadian Corps. As a result, they were detached to the 4th Canadian Armour Division, which was short of infantry, and 27 RM were welcomed with open arms by the Canadians. At that moment, 2nd Canadian Corps, of which 4th Armoured Division was a part, was thrusting east through Friesland towards the River Weser, with the objective of clearing the enemy from the Wilhelmshaven-Emden Peninsula. 27 RM came under the command of 10th Canadian Infantry Brigade on the 26th of April. The opposition in their area between the Custon Canal and the River Weser was mainly naval fortress battalions and German Marines. The terrain was not well suited to armoured operations. Endless stretches of wet ground, countless ditches, streams, and treacherous bogs and ponds. Infantry were vital for protecting the army's flanks, and 27 RM looked forward with relish to pitting themselves against their own kind. For the next 8 days, 27 RM fought with 10th Canadian Infantry Brigade, holding ground, patrolling and keeping the Germans away from the main axis of the brigade. It was hard work, but the experience gained on the River Mars was an advantage, and the battalion gave as good as it got, and sometimes better. They lost 2 men killed and 13 wounded, but captured 63 prisoners. On the 3rd of May, in the brigade assembly area at Bad Fischenhahn, they were placed at 1 hour's notice to move to Wilhelmshaven and Emden. The news was that the Germans had surrendered and the war was over. On the 5th of May, the battalion moved to Rastede to await further orders, and when Lieutenant Colonel Taylor visited headquarters 4 Armoured Division to bid farewell to General Vokes, he was presented with a letter of appreciation from the General for the performance of the battalion. 27 RM had shown what a well-trained battalion could achieve, if only given the opportunity. 28 RM was the second unit to be detached from 116 Brigade for duties with 2nd Army. They made a long, wearying trip to join 80 Anti-Aircraft Brigade at Lübeck. Their experience illustrates how fluid the situation was in Germany, from a potential assault force to occupying force at Lübeck. 28 then moved to Kiel for yet another potential assault operation, all in the space of 5 days, then joining 46 Highland Brigade for entry into Kiel, where they were the first battalion into the city. Kiel was in a bad state. 92% of the houses were untenable. The main sewage pumping station had been destroyed. The gasworks, electrical and water systems were all badly damaged. Kiel was a naval base with a large supporting infrastructure. Each factory and store had to be checked and guarded to prevent looting and damage of equipment of scientific interest. The 8th of May was VE Day, but for 28 RM the day was business as usual. Flag Officer Schleswig-Holstein raised his flag on the German naval headquarters in the Flandern bunker, with a ceremonial guard provided by 28 RM. The former passenger liner SS Oranjefontein was then commandeered as the naval HQ. It was, after all, the only source of hot water in the naval base, and all the German officers were ejected, and 28 RM took over responsibility for securing and manning the new HQ. The authorities in Kiel faced huge problems: lack of food, water and power, refugees, displaced persons, prisoners of war, and a seemingly never-ending flood of German forces and civilians arriving by sea from the east in flight from the Russians. The Kieler Ford was packed with shipping of all sizes, filled to the gunwales with men, women and children. Creating some sort of order out of this chaos became the job of 28 RM. Responsibility and authority were placed at the lowest levels, and it was not out of the order for junior NCOs to deal with senior German officers, often in command of thousands of troops. Enormous straggling convoys continually arrived with ships densely packed with troops, many short of food and water, in an indescribable state of filth, waiting to be processed. The battalion got on with their tasks, taking over German warships, disarming them and discharging their passengers. The numbers were unbelievable. At the oiling jetty at Munkberg, a section of the 28 RM mortar platoon, commanded by Corporal Baker, was responsible for unloading 27,000 Germans across 4 days, a seemingly incredible number, but commonplace at the time. Fortunately for 28 RM, a company of 33 arrived in Kiel to support them throughout this period. As the flood of humanity reduced, the battalion settled into a steady routine. There was little time for rest or time off. Kiel was out of bounds to off-duty personnel. Typhus was prevalent in the city, and anyway, non-fraternization remained in force. After a long 9 days in Kiel, 28 RM started to move from Kiel to Cuxhaven, where the naval officer in charge had requested Marines. As they left, 32 RM from 117 Brigade assumed responsibility for the port. In Cuxhaven, 28 RM's role was very much the same as it had been in Kiel. The port was in good working order with little bomb damage. Flag Officer Western Germany raised his flag on the 24th of May, which coincided with Empire Day. Once again, 28 RM provided the ceremonial guard. Here the battalion guarded itself from theft and looting which were rife. The only event of significance was the departure of Y Company to the island of Sylt for 2 weeks, whereas the most experienced company, they took charge of processing SS prisoners sent from Denmark. The experiences of the other 116 Brigade battalions follows pretty much the same narrative thread. 30 RM moved into Hamburg on the 7th of May 1945, but they were shortly moved to Brunsbüttel at the southern entrance of the Kiel Canal, where they were needed to control the naval and merchant vessels and guard the entrance to the canal. There they remained until their return to UK. 27 RM entered Wilhelmshaven on the 7th of May. The mission of the battalion was to carry out anti-defensive and anti-sabotage duties. The companies were tasked to vital points across the naval estate of the port. This operation was complete without encountering any trouble, except for a few shots fired at a staff car of a German admiral who, against orders, was trying to leave the naval headquarters at Sengevarden. The battalion settled down to tasks that remained the same throughout their stay in Wilhelmshaven. The city was full of displaced persons, German military personnel and foreign workers who had worked in the district. The main task for the companies were guarding installations and stores, protecting them from pilfering all-comers, and ensuring that any scientific and technical equipment was not willfully destroyed or looted before 30 AU or the scientists got to it. Throughout May, German naval units which had been out of the country at the time of the surrender returned to Germany. The first ships to return to Wilhelmshaven for demobilisation were the German cruisers Nürnberg and Prinz Eugen. The complete state of capitulation and resignation of the Germans is well illustrated by the size of the prize crews for each ship. A Lieutenant RMVR and one Marine per ship were all that was considered necessary to escort these warships from Germany to Germany from Denmark. Not unsurprisingly, they were keen to hand over responsibility to 27 RM as soon as possible. Several U-boats also came into the port to surrender, and the battalion provided guards for those. German troops from Western Holland were also being repatriated by sea into Wilhelmshaven, and in line with Eclipse planning, the POWs became an army responsibility. In this case, the Polish Armoured Division of 2nd Canadian Corps. These defeated troops were moved into a concentration area north of the Ems-Jade Canal, where they camped out in the open country in makeshift units to await demobilisation. By the end of May 1945, the military government had established a level of order, and with the Japanese war still continuing, it wasn't too long before the Royal Marine Office called for the return of the brigades to UK. The return to UK was confirmed at the beginning of June when General Sir Thomas Hunton, the Commandant General, arrived in Germany to inspect the brigades. If anyone was in doubt as to what was going to happen, their doubts were dispelled when after each inspection, General Hunton both praised the battalions and informed them that they would shortly be returning to the UK to be disbanded and to join formations preparing for the culmination of the Japanese War. This was not met with much enthusiasm. The brigade moved back to the UK at the end of June 1945, based initially in Plymouth. They took well-earned leave in early July before returning to what was to be the gradual breakup of the formation, which continued through until the 1st of February 1946. The last battalion to be disbanded was 28 RM on the 21st of January 1946. The only unit to remain in service was 27 RM, which then came under command of HQ Training Group Royal Marines on the 1st of February 1946 as the nucleus of the RM Battle School at Bickley. To conclude, 116 Brigade had been built in the image of Brigadier Phillips, who had presided over a very successful period on the River Mars and then in Germany with the battalions working in close concert with the Army and the Royal Navy. They had on occasion shown themselves to be as capable and fearless in action as their commando brethren, and had provided vital support to the Army and the naval parties during a difficult period of transition from hostilities to peace. They had, as General Hunton described in a special order of the day, which marked the disbandment of the brigades, displayed the adaptability, spirit and tradition of the Corps in all they'd achieved.